From Central Indiana's #1 news source, this is Fox 59 Tonight.
Good evening. Thank you for joining us here on Fox 59 Tonight. I'm Cameron Ridle. We appreciate you finding us either on your smart TV or on YouTube. If you're on YouTube, make sure you hit the subscribe button. And if you're watching on YouTube, we also have a smart TV app that you can download on your Fire TV, Roku TV, or your Apple TV. We're here every night at 8 o'clock to talk about what is happening in and around Indiana. And today, our journeys will take us to Washington, D.C., as this week now marks the 100-day mark of President Donald Trump's second term as president of the United States. And over the past 100 days, a lot has happened already. There's, of course, a lot happening here at the State House level. Big budgets were passed last week. And then there's also been things that have happened on the sidelines of Indiana politics, including new comments from Micah Beckwith and his thoughts and explanation on the 3/5 compromise. We'll talk about all of that as he continues to go viral with those comments, but also the man of the hour right now is President Donald Trump. We have had reporters there at the White House as they have now been touting their successes that they say with deportation, with tariffs, with the price of goods. All of that is up for debate. But one person who knows all of this very well from the State House level down to the Indiana politics level is Republican Strategist Whitley Yates, who is in our studio this evening. Hello, Whitley.
I'm so excited to be here.
I'm glad.
So much to talk about.
So much to talk about. You know, you've just grown to be this big national TV star. I see you on MSNBC and on News Nation. And as you reminded me, the first interview that you ever did was actually with me on the radio years ago.
Absolutely. That was my intro into media, being on the radio with Cameron. So it's always good to be here with you to dissect what's happening around the world and what's happening right here in Indiana.
So there is a lot happening. And I really don't even know where to start, but I guess right now I'm going to start with, let's start local. And that's because I'm going to start here because in our conversations on the radio, one of the things that you came on to talk about was getting Black voters and brown voters to get interested and engaged in the Indiana GOP. How long did you do that?
5 long years.
I know you had some success because you brought some folks back who decided that they wanted to join the party. But you also took a lot of heat for doing that job. What was that like?
It's like running a marathon with no finish line, and it's really hard to know how far you've come and the successes that you've genuinely had when you're consistently running that race. But I will say it was probably one of the greatest experiences I've had in my life to be the only director of diversity for the Republican Party in the entire country for over 5 years does say a lot. Not only about the direction that the party was going at the time, but also just that commitment to keeping a program like that up and running. Well, now, I don't know if you guys have noticed, but diversity is no longer being deemed something worthy of being celebrated, uplifted, or even put into place. So now the Republican establishment does not believe in diversity. And I won't say all of them, but the current regime from the top down has dismantled diversity on purpose. And so that program right now is no longer running, but hopefully will get spun out. I am working with them to create something a little bit bigger, better, and outside of the party for more people. So,
How incredibly frustrating is that? Because again, you took a lot of heat for even doing that, for even trying to recruit people to the Republican Party, and now they've literally undermined everything that you worked for 5 years and said, not important.
is it frustrating? No, because it is expected. Whenever you're creating new paths, whenever you're doing something that hasn't been done before, your sustainability will only be as good a lot of times as the systems in place to support it. And so in politics, the pendulum of power swings every 4 years and we get new elected officials. Sometimes people stay, but I already knew that as the pendulum swung and different people were coming into positions of leadership, that their focus would and could be something else, especially heading into a year where we don't have any elections. Because to be honest, and I kind of explain it like this, the way in which the parties work is to get people elected. So they raise money, and all of the function of every single role at the party level is to get people elected in positions of power, except for mine. Mine wasn't focused on getting people elected. So any of the work that I did and any of the money that was spent on my initiative would actually take away from getting Republicans elected in Indiana because mine was strictly like grassroots engagement. And it was more about building connectivity and making sure that we at least were having conversations in underrepresented communities within the party. And so when we're coming up on an election year where there's no one running, so there's not an influx of cash coming into the party, I already knew ahead of time what was going to happen.
So while you were doing that, uh, one of the people who succeeded and pretty much uh, hijacked his way into being the lieutenant governor is this guy, Micah Beckwith, who, when we talk about undermining your efforts, um, the latest comments that he has made regarding the 3/5 compromise um, really undermine what you were doing because now I hear people, I can almost hear the same people who were criticizing you before say, now this is exactly why I don't belong in the Republican Party because look at what this guy is saying.
Absolutely. And they have every right to say that. I always tell people the Republican Party, when it comes to courting minorities, does not actually have an attraction problem. It has a retention problem because you see over each election cycle that they're doing better and better with minorities. So whenever they're sticking to principles of the Republican Party and principles of conservatism, that message carries in minority communities. It's the retention and retaining those that they attract that's the problem. Because when you have people that say outlandish things, it repels the people that you actually want to retain to grow the base. Now, Micah is a friend of mine, and I let him know before I came on here today that I was going to have some strong words for him that would be as beneficial as the 3/5 compromise was for Black people. So he's already prepped to know that we cannot go around create revisionist history of what has happened and say things like the 3/5 compromise was beneficial for Black people. Anytime you're not counting a person as a person, and Micah being someone who strongly believes in being pro life and how life matters, should not be then championing something like the 3/5 compromise and its benefits to Black people.
I have his entire video. I'm going to play it so everybody gets the full context of what he says. And one of the things that everybody takes away is that he calls the 3/5 compromise a great move. This comes after the Democrats were talking about a bill at the Indiana State House and said that the negotiation was the equivalent of a 3/5 compromise. And Micah Beckwith took it upon himself to post this video online out of all the things that he could talk about, made it a point that he wanted to clarify the actual story, he says, of the 3/5 compromise. I'm going to play his video in its entirety and we'll talk about it on the other side.
Hey everybody, this is Lieutenant Governor Micah Beckwith. Want to give you an update on a bill, Senate Bill 289, which is called Unlawful Discrimination Bill. Senator Byrne is carrying that bill. It was in the Senate just a few minutes ago. Well, if you were watching or listening to the Senate, if you were trying to fall asleep and we're trying to get some good background noise on, you might have been listening. The Senate on the Democrat side, they got up and they started talking about how this bill embodies something to the effect of the 3/5 compromise. They were bringing that up. They were saying this is a bad bill because it actually encourages discrimination, just like the 3/5 compromise, going all the way back to the foundations of our nation. I would like to share with you the 3/5 compromise is not a pro-discrimination compromise. It was not a pro-discrimination or a slave-driving compromise that the founders made. It was actually just the opposite. It was a compromise that the North made with the South. At the time, there were basically 13 independent nations. They had not really created a constitution. They were sort of a European Union-esque nation, and they were saying to the pro-slave states, hey, if you want to count your slaves to have representation, more representation in Congress, we're not going to let you do that, because they knew that that would codify things like slavery into our nation. And the North stood up to the South, and they said, we're going to, if you're going to count your property, because the South says, hey, this is our property, but we want to count them in the congressional representation. We want to count them in the census. At the time, there was 30,000 people would equal one member of Congress. And so they said, we're going to count our slaves. We're going to get more members of Congress in the South. The North said, you can't do that. So what they came back to the South and they said, fine, if you want to count your property, your slaves, as whole people, we're going to count our property. We're going to count our tables. We're going to count our chairs. We're going to count all the stuff that we have in our house. And the South said, well, you can't do that. And they said, well, you're doing it with your property. We're doing it with our property. So what they did is they came up with a 3/5 compromise. They said, you will only get 3/5 of a vote when it comes to your slave. And what that did, it actually limited the number of pro-slave representatives in Congress by 40%. This was a great move by the North to make sure that slavery would be eradicated in our nation. They knew what they were doing. But now here you have Senate Democrats in today's American Republic who do not understand that. They think the 3/5 compromise was something that was a scourge on black people. That's not what it was. And how did we get to this place? We got to this place because of DEI in education. We got to this place because you have professors at woke schools that will not teach the history of what actually happened back in the foundations of our nation. Many men and leaders in our nation's history knew how wicked slavery was. They knew that God had created even black people, white people, red people, all people in his image, and they were fighting for equality for all. But they're not taught that today. And that's why you had the Senate Democrats who were getting up talking about the 3/5 compromise like it was some sort of terrible thing in our past. It was not. It actually was the exact opposite that helped to root out slavery and lead us into a more perfect union that we now see, where black, white, red, brown, all people can have equal representation under the law. That's what the 3/5 compromise was all about. So don't buy into the DEI radical revisionist history that is happening in today's culture. Know your history. Go back and study the documents. Read them for yourself like I have. Go look them up, and you will find that the 3/5 compromise and many other things like that were designed to make sure that justice was equal for all people, and equality really meant equality for all. So that's what's going on in the Senate today. Glad to keep you updated. Thanks for everyone tuning in and for all you're doing to keep our nation and our state the greatest it can possibly be.
All right, so Whitley, a lot was said there in that almost 4-minute clip. Again, this was something that he felt the need to take the time out to give this, as he said, actual history lesson. What is your reaction to that?
I mean, only in 2025 could Lieutenant Governor Beckwith basically argue that counting Black people as 3/5 of a person was actually good for them.
Hmm.
It's it's so insane that it's really hard to even justify. I do understand where he talks about the North wanting to count their property, and it was actually some sort of a tactic to kind of limit their power. But we also have to understand that the 3/5 compromise was not a moral concession or an end to slavery.
Hmm.
And really what it did politically was it gave the slaveholding states more power while completely treating people that look like me and that look like you as merely property. So anytime you're utilizing a 3/5 compromise to basically say someone is not human is not good. It doesn't matter if that was an impetus or something that helped to end slavery. It wasn't a good compromise. And so we just have to be honest, and we cannot use revisionist history. This has nothing to do with DEI. This is his own spin and take on what he wanted to get from what he read.
Is there, and there's another video which we won't even get into today, but there's this new video with him and State Representative Greg Taylor, where Beckwith is asking, well, what about from the KKK's position? Why does he keep he's the lieutenant governor of everybody, including, as you said, people who look like you and me, but he keeps seeming to represent the KKK or slave owners. What is that?
That would have to be a question for Micah, but I think what we can deduce is even bringing up, well, should the KKK be at the table? And then unfortunately, the Democrat taking the bait and, oh, everyone should be at the table, even the KKK. I think Micah set that up on purpose
Mhm.
because I think he wanted him to fall in that trap. But this is the problem. We are looking for transformational leaders, not leaders that are trying to trap other leaders into saucy sound bites in these viral moments. We are looking for transformation through policy, and we are looking for people that are going to lead this state in a better direction. And it's hard to see if leadership is at the top of the ticket when all we're hearing is lunacy coming from that office. And so, what I think he needs to do right now is focus on the role of the lieutenant governor, focus on the offices that are underneath his belt, and focus on the transformation of how Indiana will be better with him leading those offices.
Have you heard how things? I mean, we see how it's going in public, but from the back room, again, this was a guy who was not Governor Braun's pick to be his lieutenant governor. He forced his way onto the ticket to become lieutenant governor and is not really well liked by people in his own Republican circles. How's it going?
It wasn't his preference, but apparently it's God's purpose because that's who won. And I do think that this does cause a distraction for the Braun administration. They have just had their first General Assembly session. We've had our sign die and closed out this huge budget. There were some wins for the Braun team, specifically when it came to transparency in medical costs and their hospital bill and how nonprofit hospitals are going to operate. But we can't even focus on the wins of the Braun administration when we're focusing on the comments of his lieutenant governor that have now gone viral. And so I do believe that there will have to be some sort of reckoning, some sort of coming together. I think Micah wants to utilize his voice to say the things that he believes other people believe as well that haven't been said. And there is room and space to speak in that way. But then there is also understanding the mission, and we can't lose the mission for the moment. And it seems like Micah is chasing moments. And I think we need to be mission oriented, especially if they want to remain in their positions when reelection time comes. And it's not far from now, even though it may feel like they have just started. People are going to start running for governor and for lieutenant governor in about a year and a half, about 2 years in. And so, what you don't need is to have all of these moments that distracted from the true mission and how you were helping Hoosiers.
Do you think that there are enough Hoosiers who are tired of the Micah Beckwiths of the world, and others who make similar comments? We've seen what Jim Banks said, calling a Hoosier a loser in D.C. because he lost his job through the federal government. And people were saying, how do these people continue to stay in their job? Who keeps electing these people? Do you think that there's enough people that are going to say, you know what, it's time for a change?
Now, wait a minute. I like that Jim Banks comment. That guy was heckling him, walking with him in his face. And he's like, oh, this is probably why you lost your job. That was definitely a mic drop moment. And I wouldn't compare what happened with Jim Banks to what happened with Micah. This is what I'll say. What Micah showed us in the past state convention was that if you read the rule book and you play by the rules, you don't have to be the selected choice and you can still win. And I think that that moment in politics in Indiana, seeing someone basically go against the grain and be able to create a movement around himself to remain in that position of power was really great. But I think what it also did was it could be Micah's undoing. So because he has the position now, he'll run in the convention again, but you may see someone rise up and say, listen, we don't need a lieutenant governor who's consistently having these viral moments and not focusing on us. And you may see someone run against him and they may be able to build momentum and may be able to beat him out of his spot. So I would not be surprised if Braun retains his position as governor in the second term and someone beats Micah as lieutenant governor. And if I were a strategist working, I would probably put my money on that happening.
Is there a world in that same upcoming campaign cycle where you think that diversity comes back, where they decide, okay, if we want to stay in power, that maybe we do need some more Black voters, more Hispanic voters, or is that truly a thing? Do you think that's a thing of the past?
I don't see diversity coming back in the way that it was before because I'm going to be honest, when Biden was in office, he did expand it to things that I do believe really hurt the movement of diversity. I do think it went too far left consistently. And so there was a hard right, basically recovery of what was a progressive left. And so I don't actually see it coming back in that way. I do see minorities trending towards Republican leadership and voting Republican. It is just, there is something about being conservative, focusing on what's happening right here, getting back to basics, these kitchen table topics that are drawing people in a world that seems like globalization has really just taken over. However, once again, it will be the retention of those groups and those people and allowing for them to understand, like, I'm not going to agree with everything that the Republicans do, but on these issues, on these policies, this is where I stand. And so I can see that happening, but I don't think that diversity will come back in that way until a Democrat is back in the White House.
A little bit a ways away from that. And if you believe what President Trump has to say, there won't be another Democrat in office. There won't be anybody else in office because he says you would never have to vote again if he won, and he won. And so now it's time to find out how much he's going to do. He's been in office for 100 days now, and he has made that mark. He's celebrating this week. And so next we go to Washington and we talk about President Trump, his accomplishments, his goals, deportations, tariffs, the effect that it is having on you, having on the state's budget. All that more coming up next when Fox 59 Tonight continues.